So this is my paper, Spring from Night into the Sun, Metaphors of Dark and Light in the Music of the Grateful Dead. I wrote this quite a few years ago, 2012, 2013. I presented it first at the 2013 Grateful Dead Caucus, which meets with the Southwest Popular Culture Association in Albuquerque, New Mexico. It was my first visit to the Grateful Dead Caucus. Had a great time. Have been back many times since. It will be coming out as a paper in the forthcoming issue of Grateful Dead Studies, edited by Nick Merriweather. But I thought I'd put it up on the web for those who are interested to see. So here we go. In the lyrics of the Grateful Dead, invocations of darkness and light, or related concepts dealing with sight or the lack thereof, are exceedingly common tropes. David Dodd, in his online essay Light and Dark in the Lyrics of Robert Hunter, has explored their metaphorical resonance in their lyrics. Some of these, so here's some examples, some of which Dodd also points to. And there are, of course, many others, but Dark Star, just the very title itself, Dark Star, crashes, pouring its light into ashes, searchlight casting, clouds of delusion, comes a time, a blind man takes your hand, don't you see, etc., etc. So many, there's just all, and there's again many others. But along with these sort of these sort of explicit textual references, lyrical references to darkness and light, the Dead, I would argue, made use of them, of such metaphors of darkness and light in other ways as well. And as a musicologist, I'm especially interested in the ways in which their lyrical use are reflected in the Dead's instrumental work, and what their use suggests about the intended goals of their musical practice. That is, what do such lyrical contrasts between dark and light suggest about the group's approach to structuring their music, and vice versa? For the phenomenological power of the Dead's music has more than a little to do with the way in which the group so effectively used the metaphorical difference between darkness and light affectively, reflecting an uncommonly sophisticated awareness of the importance of exploring differences within their musical materials. For example, in terms of tempo, a 40 beat per minute Stella Blue versus a 130 beat per minute disco-fied arrangement of Dancing in the Streets. Great example being the so-called Mescaline Show from May 11, 1978. Where, very ripping fast Dancing in the Streets, then goes into drums and a space, and then Not Fade Away, and then a very slow, but not plodding, the Stella Blue. It's really quite beautiful. In terms of dynamics, the contrast in some versions of the other one, ranging from relentless 12/8 rolling thunder to moments of almost complete silence. A great example of this would be from April 26, 1972, at Jahrhundert Hall on their first European tour, first released as a 100-year haul. In terms of texture, the ambient music-like minimalism of a space versus the multi-instruments polyphony of Dark Star. And in terms of style, well, the group's unique idiosyncratic blend of country and western, R&B, traditional ballads, straight-up rock, blues, traditional blues tunes, psychedelic space, sonic experimentalism, etc. Now, the Dead's working out of such contrasts points to the highly experiential, bodily-centered nature of the group's practices. That is, in opposition to the traditional view of art as object, a thing created by an artist to be subsequently interpreted by an audience, they seem to agree with John Dewey in instead positing an understanding of art as experience, which is actually the title of Dewey's 1934 book, Art as it's entitled Art as Experience. That is, a temporally unfolding process of heightened awareness created in dialogue between the nominal creators, the musicians, and their actual co-creators, audiences. Or rather, as band members have repeatedly recounted, It was, fittingly, precisely their dialogical engagements with the community that they were a part of in and around San Francisco in the 1960s that led them and their audience to the possibility of musical performance in this non-work, experiential-centered way. The realization of a wide range of musical qualities would have a particularly important resonance in such a context, given that it is precisely the changes, the differences within the experience of art, rather than the assumption of a stable underlying work, that are foregrounded as of primary aesthetic interest. And there is perhaps no better example of the musical realization of difference in the Dead's oeuvre, and of their oft-used invocation of darkness and light in particular, than the musical triptych of Help on the Way, Slipknot, Franklin's Tower. Debuted in concert in 1975 and then released later that year as the opening tracks of their album Blues for Allah, it remains one of the Dead's more musically complex and adventurous compositions, and remained in fairly regular rotation till the band's demise in 1995. Featuring numerous changes in key and meter, intricately balanced between sections of strictly composed and highly improvised material, although even the strictly composed sections were subject to changes in performance over time. Audiences rapturously welcomed this musical workhorse when its distinctive opening chords rang out as a sign of the seriousness of the group's creative ambitions. A couple of my favorite examples would be from May 9th, 1977, the night after the famous Cornell show, where they open the show with Help, Slipknot, Franklin's. It's a great version. And then exactly a month later, on June 9th, 1977, the final night of their Winterland run, a June Winterland run, where they really, and it's actually the penultimate version of Help, Slipknot, Franklin's. They do it one more time in October of that year before they shelve it until they bring it back in 1983, at which point Brent Midland has taken over on keyboards from Keith Gottschall, and it's different. There's some minor musical changes, and to me it's never quite as good as it was in 76, 77. But key to the effective power of this musical sequence is the way in which the lyrics and music narrate a transition from darkness to light, from doubt and uncertainty to revelatory affirmation. That mirrors, though in more structured and semantically descriptive fashion, the macro structure of the Dead's more exploratory improvisational journeys, the form of the archetypal second set, for example. As the product of a particularly experimental time in the group's career, the 6 or so months following their October 1974 retirement shows, its creation suggests an attempt to capture in relatively concise form the lessons learned since the group's inception of how to balance formal constraint with improvisational freedom and realize in music a sense of progress through various affective states. Although the Dead performed Franklin's Tower fairly often on its own after Help on the Way fell out of their performing repertoire for 6 years in the fall of 1977, and they performed Help on the Way, Slipknot once on its own on New Year's Eve '76, and then again in 1991. It is as a multi-movement musical work that I'm here concerned, since this is how the pieces were initially presented, and then what best makes sense, as I will show, of the intricate interrelation of their overall construction. On account of its three-part structure and turbulent, unstable middle section, the triptych evokes comparisons to sonata form in Western art music, with its ternary exposition, development, recapitulation structure, that within the group, bassist Phil Lesh would certainly have been well aware of. But with little structural similarity between Help on the Way and traditional sonata form expositions, nor return of musical material, modulated or not, in the third section, nor even a movement back to the initial key of F minor in Franklin's Tower, there are also substantial differences. However, as music theorist Scott Burnham points out, the continuing appeal of sonata form, centuries after its initial development and in radically different socio-cultural contexts, is because of how it, quote, makes a central issue of resolution and of return. In dramatizing the return from dominant to tonic, sonata form performs not just a return, but a return to nature. This is a broadly resonant scenario and hard to resist. Sonata form brings us home, and who among us does not long for some sense of home, unquote. So although the exact methods used are different in Help, Slipknot, Franklin's than sonata form, the overall dramatic arc of tension to resolution, a return to home, is indeed quite similar. However, instead of a return of musical themes and the resolution of large-scale harmonic tension, here the return is manifested by a striking number of lyrical connections between the songs that bookend the triptych, with the resolution provided by a progressive, that is non-cyclical tonal movement from an unstable F minor, with its lack of authentic cadences, and instead dominant seventh harmonies on the fourth degree, that is F Dorian, if you want to think of it as kind of a modal key of sorts, in Help on the Way, through dizzying diminished seventh-based arpeggios and metrical shifts to A minor for the largely improvised central section of Slipknot, that then, through more diminished runs and metrical shifts, modulates to A major, or A mixolydian for Franklin's Tower. For both Help and Franklin's begin with invocations of temporality. The former, Help, to the future, to what's to come, paradise waits. The latter, in Franklin's, to the past, to what's already occurred in another time's forgotten space. There is also in both the presence of the feminine. The paradise in Help is a she, her angels in flame. In Franklin's, your eyes looked from your mother's face. Furthermore, both beginnings allude to passages in the Bible. Help on the Way, like a child she is pure, she is not to blame, to Proverbs chapter 20, verse 11. Even a child is known by his actions, whether his deeds are pure and right. Also, Philippians chapter 2, verse 15, do everything without grumbling or arguing so that you may become blameless and pure, children of God without fault in a warped and crooked generation. Then you will shine among them like stars in the sky. And in Franklin's, wildflower seed on the sand and shore, sand and stone, may the four winds blow you safely home, as well as its slight rewrite in the penultimate stanza of the song, wildflower seed in the sand and wind, and may the four winds blow you home again. These allude to, they evoke the three parables in the fourth chapter of the Gospel of Mark, of the sower, the growing seed, and the mustard seed. And I won't read those, but you can read those on your own. But it is the many references to darkness and light that most strongly resonate with the transformation in musical materials. Along with the future-directed opening stanza of Help on the Way, the title, in conjunction with the song's minor mode, suggests both the need and potential for some kind of saving grace, a light at the end of a tunnel, perhaps the very paradise invoked in its first line. But this paradise is on a crest of a wave, her angels in flame, thus suggesting both her highest possible point of attainment as well as the likelihood of imminent fall, which surely must be, in this context, the fall, that is, from paradise. The flaming angels, then, would be those placed by God to prevent a return by Adam and Eve to paradisiacal bliss after their expulsion from Eden. In Genesis chapter 3, verse 24, after he drove the man out, he placed on the east side of the Garden of Eden cherubim and a flaming sword flashing back and forth to guard the way to the tree of life, so they cannot return to Eden. She has no pain also evokes this myth, since part of God's curse of Eve during the expulsion from paradise was pain in bearing children. But instead of the feminine as the cause of the fall, of course, in Genesis, it's Eve who first eats the fruit of the tree of good and evil, and tempted by the serpent, and then gives it to Adam after. Here, paradise is in fact a woman. Rather than looking back to a pre-lapsarian innocence, however, the second stanza insists on her futurity. Poised for flight, wings spread bright, spring from night into the sun. This invocation of change is musically depicted and dramatized through the first unambiguous appearance of chromaticism on flight, so a B-flat 7 chord accompanying a D natural in the melody, and then again on bright, the same chord, followed by a clever text painting of sun, set to an appropriate and so far unheard harmonic color, a major 7th chord, foreshadowing the eventual change to the major mode in Franklin's Tower. I'm just going to play this for you.
What's Mr. Right? Mr. Right?
And those of you who know the Grateful Dead's music well will probably recognize that recording as one from The Vault, which is from August 13th, 1975. We're at the Great American Music Hall in San Francisco, where they debuted all of Blues for Allah live. And it's, of course, an amazing performance, that one. But though Paradise's place seems to be in the future, the following lines, don't stop to run, she can fly like a lie, she cannot be outdone, also suggest the paradoxical nature of attempts to attain her, that is Paradise. In the second verse of Help on the Way, there is another elusive reference to darkness and light, but instead of in its central B stanza, as it was in the first verse, it appears in its second A. Crippled but free, I was blind all the time, I was learning to see. Not only do these paradoxes recall those from the same part of the first verse, but also, since the lead guitar-led instrumental passage directly follows, it portentously suggests its music as precisely this realization of freedom and sight, and analogously, the upcoming Slipknot as well as an even more adventurous lead guitar-led instrumental work. The third verse, by comparison, lacks any explicit reference to darkness and light, but it does revolve around a comparable dualism, I and you, an addressor and an addressee. Indeed, it suggests a synthesis of sorts between the wholly third-person address of the first verse and the wholly first-person address of the second, as the second-person pronoun you here makes its first appearance. Is this you the speaker has, I know only this, I've got you today, then the paradise that had been earlier waiting? We know that she can fly like a lie and can't be outdone, which would explain why the addresser pleads with the addressee not to fly away. Having declared that he loves what he loves and wants it to remain as it is, however, he confirms this love as the addressee, honey, it's you. And though we know, thanks to published editions of the song, that it is TOO in making it to, not TWO, the homonymic resonance of the latter, of TWO, should not be discounted, since the entire song suggests the unfolding dynamics of a relationship between two identities. But then, in fact, so does the whole triptych between the darkness of Help on the Way Slipknot and the light of Franklin's Tower. Rather than a simple triumph of the latter over the former, however, the final lines suggest a synthesis of sorts. For if love is the it in honey, it's you, then making it would seem to be a euphemism for union through love, whether physical or spiritual, without which the dream, paradise perhaps, could not be realized. As so many narratives, archetypal narratives insist, however, before paradise or some goal can be achieved, a trial of some sort, what mystics such as St. John of the Cross might call a dark night, called a dark night of the soul, or again referencing the Bible, one might think of the valley of the shadow of death in the 23rd Psalm. Something like this is necessary, and that is exactly what Slipknot seems to be a musical depiction of. Slipknots are used for, among other things, hangings, and the subject of the title has an ominous connotation that matches well the minor mode intricacies and harmonically adventurous collective improvisation that characterizes the piece. Now, where Help on the Way ends and Slipknot begins is not precisely clear, but I would suggest, perhaps, for the first metrical shift, here written as in bar 4 as a bar of 5/4, and immediately following diminished seventh arpeggios, given how they clearly break from what has come before in Help on the Way, and are also later repeated at its end in the transition to Franklin's Tower. Effecting a modulation up a whole step to G minor that lasts only 6 beats before another bar of diminished seventh arpeggios, identical to the first, although transposed up a whole tone. This then leads into 2 bars of rapid chord changes before finally resolving to A minor at letter C. Let's just listen to that. This is beginning of the third bar there at the F minor add 9. As my transcription shows, the harmonic rhythm then slows down considerably. Although I've marked in oscillations between A minor and E minor through C there, one could understand all the notes of C as part of an A minor 11th chord, since the notes of E minor 7th, E, G, B, D are respectively the 5th, 7th, 9th, and 11th of A minor. Although relatively harmonically stable, the differences foregrounded here are instead found in the shifting of metrical placement, as the new melody first begun on the downbeat is delayed by an eighth note when repeated, as if to purposefully frustrate the listener's expectations, and even more than once, has happened more than once in performance, the performer's skills. So just to play C there. Okay, after the group's subsequent improvisations, in which unusually lead guitarist Jerry Garcia always used a highly distorted guitar tone, reflecting seemingly the piece's overall baleful mood, the group begins an ascending scalar motif, as if to attempt to escape the prevailing darkness that through 10 bars builds up to a dramatic harmonic shift to D major, suggesting perhaps the light at the end of the tunnel. But it is not to be, at least for the moment, for it only lasts 2 bars before dropping back down to A minor to set the stage for either 4 or 8 repetitions, beginning at letter E, of a fragment of the earlier melody from section C that suggests a warming up of sorts for the final trial to come. And as it says there, in April of 1977, they began to repeat, to double up sections of Help on the Way and Slipknot, to extend it, which I really like, because I like how they like to stretch it out. And they do this through October of 1977. And then after that they drop it, and then when they return, when they bring it back, when they break it out in 1983, they don't again do those repetitions. And there's some other minor musical changes which I won't get into here. All right. Okay, so and this sort of warming up of sorts for the final trial to come, and that is precisely what occurs with the following metrical shifts. Again at F, and then there's 2 Fs there. But yeah, basically at bar 12 there, measure 12 through 18 and 19. So 2 bars of diminished seventh arpeggios, an exact repetition of the 2 bars of changing harmony every beat arpeggios, through which the piece earlier modulated to A minor at the beginning of Slipknot. This time, however, we find ourselves in the parallel key of A major at letter G. So we land on an A major chord, although it is immediately compromised by a C over G chord that simultaneously recalls the earlier A minor, since all the notes of C over G are within the compass of A minor 11th. But while simultaneously foreshadowing the strong presence of G major in what follows, because Franklin's Tower is A major, but really A mixolydian with an A major, G major, D major. And let's again listen to that, starting at bar 13. After the many twists and turns of Slipknot, the beginning of Franklin's Tower marks a number of dramatic changes. Clearly in a major key for the first time, the reintroduction of vocals after an extended period without them, and a repetition of the same three chords with rhythmic consistency and metrical regularity in sharp contrast to what has come before. And rather than the searching, expectant, yet uncertain lyrics of Help on the Way and the ominous connotations of Slipknot, Franklin's Tower abounds with references to returning home and the achievement of clarity and understanding through the power of sound. The ringing of the bell turning night to day. If you get confused, just listen to the music play. And the transformation of the darkness of night into the light of dawn. For just as it is the rising sun that rolls away the morning dew, Franklin's Tower functions similarly within the overall arc of the triptych as the dawning of a new day, the lighthouse that brings one safely home, the very help that was earlier said to be on its way. Such interconnectedness supports the parallel mentioned earlier between the relationships within Help on the Way and that of the entire triptych, as narrating a negotiation between the self and the other, between darkness and light. But such a parallel is also supported by a similarity in form. The three verses and their ABA divisions in Help on the Way anticipate the ternary form of the entire triptych, both in their threefold divisions and the third section's synthesis of sorts of what has come before. These relationships recall Owsley Stanley's hermetic influence motivation for the design of the Wall of Sound, which the Dead, along with Stanley and Owsley and the returner and Ron Rickersham of Alembic, built and they toured with in 73, 74. As above, so below. What happens on the macro level should map onto the micro. However, they also point to the way in which the Help Slipknot Franklin's triptych mirrors the structures of the Dead's performances in narrating the archetypal movement from order through disorder and back to order, doing so not only through the exploration of differences of tempo, timbre, texture, and style, but also in the form and lyrics of their songs through the metaphorical contrast between darkness and light. The importance of such musical differentiation is what Bob Weir seems to be getting at in an interview with a friend of mine, actually, Jesse Jarno, from way back in 2001, stating, quote, "A show has to breathe. You can't just keep slamming the audience all night. You have to bring it up. You have to let it fall back down, dynamically speaking, a fair bit to, in my estimation, create a complete experience," unquote. And contrasting there with Bruce Springsteen, who was not quite just much more like intense the whole time, which to me just Springsteen is great in some ways, but to me, what's one of the things about the music is just it gets all that intensity. If it's intensity all the time, it just gets a little boring. Anything just all the time just gets a little boring. Similarly, Robert Hunter, actually in the liner notes, 400 Year Hall, which is has that other one that I was talking about earlier, from April 26, 72, points to the importance of difference within the Dead's music in his liner notes to 100 Year Hall. Quote, tension, release. Drop back now and again, or you got nowhere to go. Bands that don't learn that might sell more records, but drop by the wayside. I think that's a very astute observation by Hunter. Expanding on John Dewey's theory of aesthetic experience, Philip Jackson writes that what is special about them, quote, are the enduring changes that they produce. They leave in their wake a changed world. The experiencer changes by undergoing a transformation of the self, gaining a broadened perspective, a shift of attitude, an increase of knowledge, or any of a host of other enduring alterations of a psychological nature, unquote. And it is the embracing of just such a relationship between the Dead's music and the realization of difference as its defining attribute that is not only one of their most important musical legacies, but also, I think, explains the prevalence of tropes of such a phenomenologically foundational indifference as darkness and light in the lyrics of the Grateful Dead, and as demonstrated in this paper metaphorically in the structures of their music. I would suggest in conclusion that such differences point to the Dead's musical practices as constituting a neo-John Deweyian, kind of even neo-avant-garde, and neo-avant-garde in the sense developed by by the aesthetic theorist Peter Berger in his treatise published in 1984, in English anyways, The Theory of the Avant-Garde. A neo-avant-garde attempt to reintegrate art and life after the triumph, and in the wake of the triumph of the autonomous principle of modernist aesthetics in the 1950s, in which art and life became completely, really radically separated. Rather than, for the most part, apolitical then, as they have often been characterized, the Grateful Dead represent one of the most significant attempts in the latter half of the 20th century to fulfill John Dewey's understanding of artistic experience as integral to the realization of the proper balance between collective forces and individual freedom, to which the difference between light and darkness, metaphorically oneself and the other, so powerfully speaks. So thank you. That's the end of the paper, the presentation. My thanks to Professor Eric Lewis of the Department of Philosophy at McGill University for many invaluable conversations on the subject of this paper and of the music of the Grateful Dead more generally. He was also the co-supervisor of my dissertation and was incredibly valuable in many regards in helping me finish that. Thank you for watching. Please leave any comments or questions in the comments, and please share with anyone you think might be interested. If you'd like to subscribe to my channel, please do. I will soon be putting up a video in which a more practical tutorial on playing this Help on the Way, Slipknot in particular, Franklin's as well, so that's much simpler. Using some of these same transcriptions and sort of showing interested guitarists how to play through that. So again, thank you for watching, and maybe see you next time.